Good day and welcome back to another DB Legends video. In this video we are going to talk about equipment. We're going to talk about what equipment is, how you can get equipment, what equipment does, all the ways it works, pretty much everything about it. So the most important thing to start off with is rarity of equipment and what equipments are. So equips are items you can place on your units, and you get three different types of rarity. You get bronze, silver, gold, and you also get black. Black denotates unique equipment, and that is equipment that's only available to a specific subset of characters or type of characters that can use that equipment, whereas gold, silver, and bronze are more generic. Generally speaking, the range or the color does indicate the usefulness, with gold being probably the most useful and widely dispersed gear, whereas bronze and silver are more unique gear for certain situations and certain types of lower rarities of hero. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad. If you look at gear, generally speaking, you can see that every slot has a range of abilities. So if we look at slot 1 here, we can see obviously we have attained 3.35% strike attack and minus 1.6 health, but we have a maximum range of 10% health and minus 5% base health, or sorry, 10% strike attack and minus 5% base health. If we examine another piece of gear, we can notice that this gear has a higher level of strike attack whilst also having a higher level of health reduction. In an ideal world, we'd be aiming for a low base health reduction and a high base strike attack. Usually the level of a stats that a slot has is denotated by the color. As you could see, we had a green, yellow, and red stat line for all three of those equips. In this one, we have a yellow stat line for that equipment, and here we have a red one. You can notice that the red one is higher than yellow. Sometimes, obviously, you can get a yellow that's on the end of the yellow spectrum, and you can get a red that's at the beginning of a red spectrum, and you only end up with minuscule differences. But that is how it is. A good way to gauge is the color coding of the slot. You'll notice each equip has 3 slots and 3 little dots on it. If the dot is red, essentially you've got almost a max slot. You've pretty much got the max stat cap range for that slot. This is important for later on. When you are farming gear, it's very important that the very first slot on the gear is red. The reason being is that's a slot you cannot re-upgrade at all. So the most important slot on gear is the red slot. The rest we'll talk about later on. Now, when you get equipment, you can upgrade them. Each time you upgrade the equipment, you will unlock another slot on the gear. As we can see here, you can spend souls. The souls cost is dependent on the rarity of the gear. As we upgrade the slots, the overall grading of the card will change and be an aggregate grading. Generally speaking, an upgraded card will always be a higher aggregate than another card. As you can see, we now have a D ranked card, but the other card was C ranked due to the fact that it has a red first slot. Of course, this is an average grading, so sometimes you can end up with 2 very good slots but 1 very bad one and end up with a very average grading. This is fine because later on you'll be able to re-upgrade the gear. But it's very important, the grading on the unit is only an indicator of its overall performance, but it's much more important that you focus on the individual slots and stat slots of the gear. It's much more important, for example, that your first slot is maxed out because, like I said, you can't re-upgrade anything about it. If we take a look at this unique equipment I have, it's very good in the first slot. It's only 0.25% off the max, but obviously I can now upgrade the second and third slot. Now there are 3 ways to upgrade. So you have the re-upgrade. This is where you just re-upgrade the item. Now it can actually be lower than your current stat. You have no security over this. So if I re-upgrade twice and both of my upgrades end up being lower, then I have just a lower stat in that slot overall, which we do end up having happen. So obviously this is not ideal, but it is the cheapest way, and you might sometimes luck out on a very high reroll. Then we get secure upgrades. There's 2 types to this. So the first is a secure upgrade. Essentially, this means that we cannot lose what we currently have. So it doesn't guarantee an upgrade per se, but you will not get a reduction in your overall stats. This is more expensive, but again, gives you more chance of just having a reroll that lucks out rather than having a lower, kind of roll. Then you get the guaranteed upgrade, but for a higher cost. These are highly expensive, but they can be used to really fine-tune your gear and push it back up to its highest peaks. Ideally speaking, because of how expensive gear cost upgrades are, it's a lot easier to farm the gear and try and get multiple first slot red gears and try and get the highest absolute overall upgrade you can before you begin the re-upgrading slot process. Remember, you can only upgrade slots 2 and 3. You don't get locked out, you can upgrade both, but the first slot's most important. So if you get multiple red first slot gears, you can really test and take the highest one overall, and hopefully that saves you some rerolling costs. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to farm some gear. Farming gear is pretty easy. You go to a stage, you run the stage, you can auto skip them if you want, if you are able to, and you will get gear drops. Now gear does have a drop rate. So for example, we ran the stage 10 times, but we only got 3 Vegeta gears, and it's going to be dependent on the gear. Unique gear is the lowest drop rate, which makes farming it more difficult and more expensive. That's where you're going to spend a lot of stamina in this game. As you can see, upgrading the gear itself is also highly expensive. And you can see that even though all 3 of these gears are D, D, and D, they each have different stats about them. Obviously, the ideal process is to find one that has a red first slot. And so generally what I do is I just sell everything that's not a red first slot. I do keep some yellows because I'm just trying to have a pool of equipment to pull from. But I do suggest if you are getting into the equipment process, only keep yellows and reds and above and start building up your equipment pool from there. It can get very confusing when you have a piece of gear that has 2 red slots and 1 green and a red, and just it all gets a bit messy. So yes, gear can be a little bit overwhelming, but it isn't something that you should be afraid of. A lot of it is just farming and focusing on singular types of gear at once. That's the most important process, making sure that you farm a specific piece of gear while it's up, and you try and get 1, 2, or 3 copies of it at most. Ideally, I always aim for 3 good pieces of each piece of gear, because I definitely can run more than 3 in some teams. There's also some very good generic gear that you can get that will help you out, but it's a very important process. Now that we've covered basic gear, we need to talk about awakenings. Awakenings are a little bit different. Generally speaking, they are usually just straight stat upgrades on pieces of gear that you have. So if you awaken a piece of gear, you will receive a upgraded version of it, generally speaking. It also sometimes adds additional equip conditions to that gear, so you don't know if you can equip that gear to certain heroes or to certain types of heroes. It also sometimes will just change the piece of gear entirely. Its stats will change, the stat distribution will change. Generally, awakening medals, or these awakening imprints, or memories as they're called, are purchased from the Ultra Zenkai Rush shop, but you can also farm them from certain stages. They do pop up from time to time. You can always click the how to get section and it will show you where you can get these exact memories. Now, of course, what's also important is that you have the appropriate equipment. So if you're looking where to find equipment, let's say you want to really find that no way gear that we're going to awaken, you can go to the archive and you can find all the listed equipment here. You can search by name, by type, and you can really just try and sort out where you can find the gear, and that's going to be a lot easier than trying to randomly guess which stage to take on. So fortunately for us, the equipment I'm going to use to display awakenings I can get from the equipment gear shop. You can get a lot of good standard equipment from here, so I do suggest picking them up. The reason I'm picking up 30 is because you're going to see that you need quite a wide variety of rarities. But an important thing is if you are picking up gear for awakening, the stats on that gear do not matter. The rarity, not the rarity, the overall grading matters because you need gear of certain grades to access the awakenings. But the individual slots on that gear do not matter. It does not matter if you use all Z related gear to awaken. It doesn't matter because the stats and everything are re-rolled when you awaken. So you just need a massive amounts of gear so that you can reawaken everything and go from there. So while we are awakening everything, we're just going to do a very brief recap. All gear has rarity, all equips have rarity, all equips have 3 slots. Those slots are re-rollable for the second and third slot, and the first slot is the one you can't. The slots are all indicated by color for ease, green being the lowest rolls, yellow being mid rolls, and red being high tier or max rolls. You can of course max out gear quite a lot, and the stat differences do matter. Upgrading gear will upgrade each slot, so you can upgrade gear a total of twice, so that all 3 slots are active. When you awakening gear might change its equip conditions. Gear could only be equipped by certain heroes, and it might also change the actual stats on the gear, but most times it's just a flat stat augmentation. So that kind of covers gear so far. We've shown everything pretty nicely, and if you are struggling with gear, like I said, it's best to always just focus on what you want to work on. Focus on a team and equips for that team and each unit one by one. It will take you a while, but if you only work on 2 teams or 3 teams as a new player, you should really manage to make it. So now that we have our memories, which we've purchased from the Zenkai Ultra Space Time Rush store, and now that we have the requisite equips, we can now begin the process of upgrading. I'm going to do 2 awakenings so you can see that the equipment we use does not affect the overall awakening. So you will also need these special souls. They can also be acquired from the Zenkai Ultra Space Time Rush store. Nowhere else to get them. You can get them from there. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the exact requirements of the first awakening. So 1A grade, 2B grade golds, and 2B grade silvers. And then we're going to use higher ranked gear. And I'm going to show you that it makes no bearing. This is why with awakenings, if you are going to awaken, be prepared to awaken a lot of gear, because you need to awaken into a very high first slot roll. So you have to awaken into a red roll so that you can then upgrade that equipment and then re-upgrade it. So awakening equipment's great, but it also does require you to, again, farm a lot of equipment. Fortunately, that equipment slots don't matter, it's just the overall rarities. So it's relatively easy to do and not so expensive anymore with all the buffs to Zenkai Rush. Now we've gone and we're choosing higher ranked equipment, all gold equipment, and S rank thrown in there, and we come out with the same grading. So if you are going to awaken equipment, don't panic about what you use, just use the appropriate rarities until you come out with a red slot piece of gear. And that kind of covers it for equipment. Obviously it's important to then equip units with the appropriate equipment that will be based on the units, and we'll talk about that in another video. Just wanted to cover how equipment works, how do we upgrade it, how do we farm it, and how do we awaken it, essentially. But yes, so everything's gone, well, more than fine. And I hope this helped you guys to understand a bit more about the equipment process, how the slots work, and how you can really get it to work better for you, and what you're looking for when you are running equipment. I myself recently have only just gotten into running equipment, and so I've had to kind of figure all this out, and so I thought I would just translate it over to you guys. As you can see with Awakening Krillin's memory, we don't have the required components, and sometimes some memories are not available, as you can see here with the Broly one. So just try and do your best. But yeah, that is pretty much it from me, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you can leave a like on it, or you can leave a comment and I'll try and get back to you. But yeah, I really want to hear your guys' thoughts. Maybe you have any tips or tricks that I missed that can help players in farming gear and just upgrading their gear. It is quite resource heavy. It will use a lot of stamina. It will use a lot of energy, a lot of zenny. So be prepared to spend a lot of resources and time here. It is one of the more finicky processes of Legends, but it is worth it once you get the hang of it. But I suggest starting small and slowly expanding from there. It's always the best method to go. Choose one team, start character by character, finding the best equipment you can, maximizing it, and then moving from there. Yeah, but otherwise, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Leave a like if you did. Leave a comment, I'll try to reply back, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, take care, stay safe, and as always, I will see you guys next time. So thank you so much for watching, and bye.